next we have Michael Cook presenting his work from Goldsmiths on building a 3D game designer.
Right, are we good to go? We're good to go. Thanks very much. Thank you, Antonius, as well. There was a point during your talk where I thought, oh, that's great, I can riff off that at the start of my talk, and I forgot by the time I'm here. But if you, at some point, there'll be something that twigs in all of your minds in relationship to this. So my talk has a very long title and a very stupid title, but the important thing is 3D game designer, so we're going to be riffing off some elements of the previous talk, and also competing alongside humans, engaging with a community of humans who design as well. My name is Michael Cook. I work at the Computational Creativity Group at Goldsmiths in the University of London with Professor Simon Colton, who's my PhD supervisor and general person. Couldn't finish that thought in time. These are some links, and yes, I'm on Twitter. Talk to me. I like hearing from people. Here's this talk in a nutshell. I'm going to talk to you about Angelina as a game designer. I'm going to give you a brief history of it, a very brief history, and about the latest version that I've just been working on, and about what that version does, what's special about it. And then, spoilers, what's special about it is it engages with a creative community of game designers through the medium of game jams. I'm going to tell you what they are, we're going to talk about what Angelina did, and then after I show you why it wasn't good enough, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do to fix that, that you'll be hearing about in the next talk in however many years' time. So here's my PhD work, Angelina. Many years, too many years ago, Angelina looked like this. It was a thing for making simple arcade games where little blobs moved around, highly inspired by some work by Tegelius et al. And the idea was that we would break up a game design into many constituent parts. Maybe that was what I was ripping off of, who knows? So things like the rules would be handled by one aspect of Angelina, and then the level layout would be handled by another aspect, and this was all very basic, and computational creativity really wasn't in the picture at this point. It was really just a system that had solved separate content generation problems at the same time, and tried to do it in a way that appreciated what was going on. But then, you can only hang around Simon for so long before getting addicted to the idea. So subsequent versions of Angelina began to move into this realm of computational creativity. So we started, a very common theme in our group was mining things off The Guardian. So Angelina would take a Guardian newspaper article, it would select it itself using various metrics, and then it would build a platform game, but it would try and mine information from the internet to try and theme the game around the newspaper article, try and give you a flavour of what the game was about. Even down to things like this picture of Peter Mandelson, a British politician. He looks angry in this picture, and that's because Angelina perceived a negative sentiment towards him both in the news article and also on social media that day. Pretty basic stuff, but it was a chance for me to start thinking about how this system could express itself in interesting ways. As Antonius mentioned, a puzzling present was my detour into code generation, code modification, mechanic invention. And this was some exciting stuff which I'm going to capitalize on in the near future with Angelina. But this is really just to show you some of the things we've explored over time. If you want to play any of them, if the talk's getting boring, gamesbyangelina.org/games, you can have a go on some of them right now. So it got to the point where we needed more funding for me to continue doing my job. We wrote a lovely research proposal to take Angelina a bit further, and as it kind of coincided with the end of my PhD, this was kind of an opportunity to do something new, to have a fresh start, and to implement a new version of Angelina. And I wanted to do it in Unity. Unity is a popular game engine. It's used by everything from commercial, large game studios, all the way down to amateurs starting off their first game, maybe with no programming experience at all, although Unity's not quite that welcoming. It's got millions of people use this as a tool, and even more, hundreds of millions of people have this installed. And it's not just that it exports to the web, it exports everywhere. It exports to your phone, to mainstream games consoles, more obscure stuff as well. It's highly extensible. Angelina can extend this tool and build things into it, and I can use it like a proper tool for once. And it feels modern. And this is the version of Angelina I'm going to talk to you about today, and then you'll realise that it's not modern at all. It's just the engine that's modern. But that's fine. There are 3 stages in the paper that describe how Angelina goes about designing the game, and I'm not going to go over them in gory detail, but I will touch quite a bit on this first stage. So the first stage is pre-design, where Angelina prepares itself to design the game. And first of all, it has to work out what this game's actually going to be about. And this is kind of the most important change that we made to Angelina. And it was inspired by these things. It was inspired by game jams. And I'm going to talk about game jams later on, but the important thing for now, these are 3 different game jams that were held over the last 12 months. The important thing to notice is that they're about themes. They're about abstract themes. So in the fishing game jam, dozens of game developers made games about fishing, or cyberpunk, or demakes, where you take an idea for a game and you crush it down into a simpler format or an older technology. Now, what this led to is the idea that Angelina could be powered by a phrase, not a Guardian news article, not some kind of abstract, random idea of shapes on a screen. But I could give it a phrase and say, make me a game about beaches, make me a game about research in Slovenia, make me a game about people with buckets on their heads. And it may not make you a very good game, but the important thing is that we're focusing on starting from these kinds of free text inputs. And that's important because it is very similar to how people enter game jams, right? They're given a theme, and then they make a game based on that theme, in theory. So how does this pre-design phase work? It starts off, I've given it this theme, what does it do from here on out? Let's say it's got fishing as a theme, or maybe a more complex one. Well, at the moment we can only work on single words. We can't analyze interesting phrases. Tony was talking yesterday about words that are paired together like salt and pepper. We can't quite do that yet. So Angelina first has to decide what word it's going to focus on in this theme. So it looks for words that are rare enough to be interesting, but not so rare that they're going to be totally obscure when it tries to look for media. And then it does some word association. So it starts to explore the space that's just outside this theme. So in fishing, you might look at boats, you might look at bait, you might look at food even. And eventually it'll choose this word that it's going to use as the theme for its game. It's going to hone in on this one word. And once it's got this word, it can go and look around for media. So we get things like 3D models. We get fonts for the menu screens. We get music for the atmosphere, sound effects to play while you're walking around. We grab metaphors, we grab linguistic tricks, textures, we grab it all. And once Angelina's got this huge collection of information that it can use, it has to decide how it's going to be assigned to different parts of the game. So here's a screenshot which is dark and never shows up on any projector anywhere in the world. But the dark blob next to the other dark blobs is a piece of scenery. So this is a 3D model. Angelina says, whenever this zone is assigned to a part of the level, use this model. And then it might choose some textures. These textures are going to go here for this reason. And there's sound effects which are not visual, so I've just put a line there. But imagine there was a little sound there playing when they enter this area. And I wanted to show you how some of these processes go about, because we were talking about Twitter yesterday, before the conference kicked off. There was a lovely tutorial. Angelina uses Twitter in reverse. Rather than mining things off Twitter that other people are saying naturally, it just gets out there and it asks people. So it's got this massive repository of textures that it has no idea at all what they are. And it is going through them slowly and asking people to give it words that it associates with it. And you might think, well, this is actually kind of a cheap way of getting free information. It's almost so good it's cheating. But what's interesting is that people lie, and people make things up, and they think it's funny to trick this helpless Twitter bot that has no way of filtering this. So at the moment, we're just collecting everything. We're collecting the lies as well, and the hope is that one day Angelina will be able to tell the liars from the people who are telling the truth, and they will start to be ignored. That's what I'd like to see. And the upshot is you get games like this. So this was a game about vegetables, and you can see that Angelina's managed to find textures that are vegetable-like in their nature. And this is, it's very basic stuff, but it's quite fun. This has no relationship to vegetable because the 3D database is interesting at best. But I'll show you another game in a minute that's a bit less crazy. And then there's some nice sugar on top. So we've always generated puns for their names, but now we've got idioms as well, thrown in some proverbs and things like that. And the music selection is quite nice. So one of the lovely tricks that Tony Veal's metaphor magnet can pull off is it can tell you how people feel about a certain word. So if you're making a game about thieves, metaphor magnet can tell you that thieves intimidate people. People feel intimidated by thieves. And then we say, okay, well, we've got this music database that has 8 different moods associated with each piece of music. Which one is intimidated closest to? So we use another tool called Disco, which can tell you how similar 2 words are to each other. and Angelina can make a connection between intimidated and one of the words. And I'll show you an example about that later, and then it can choose a piece of music based on that. Much as I'd love to go into the co-evolutionary stuff, I really want to talk to you about the creative community engagement stuff. So it is in the paper. It is in the paper, and that's about what I need to say about that. But you can go and see it, and I talk about fitness functions and how the different evolutionary systems are distributed and how they connect to each other. And it's all very interesting. And I'm writing my thesis right now, which is why my enthusiasm for it is rock bottom. Creative communities. This is much more interesting. So here are some things that got me thinking recently. Last year in Bordeaux, we had a lovely autumn school. Rob Saunders gave a great talk on social creativity, agents that shared ideas and had gatekeepers and critics, and you weren't allowed to share your ideas with a particular community unless they passed by these people who decided what was good and what wasn't. And if you've been on Twitter, you'll understand what that feels like. And Simon Colton, obviously, 4 years now, we've been thinking about how is your software perceived by other people, and what types of people perceive your software, and how do they perceive it differently. And also, I've been learning to be a game designer, and I've been thinking about how I've been growing and changing as a game designer, and what's affected me. And this all kind of led up to wanting to get Angelina to participate in game jams. So what are game jams? Well, the jam part comes from how musicians might jam with one another. So the idea was everyone gets together. There is a time limit normally, some kind of period in time where people are making a game from scratch. So that's the art, the music, sound effects that you might use, all the code. You're allowed to bring like a basic game engine along. And a very common, very popular jam is Ludum Dare. So in December 2013, there were over 2,000 games entered to the competition, some by groups, so probably talking 2,500 people who took a weekend out of their lives to make a video game. And these are shameless promotions for my entries, but these are just examples of human-made ones. And the theme for December 2013 was, you only get one. And you see this is an interesting theme. It's not like fishing or cyberpunk. This can be interpreted in many different ways, and I'd argue that actually, if you replace the word game here with art or music or anything like that, the creative interpretation of this phrase might be one of the hardest creative tasks I have come up across. And Angelina doesn't do this very intelligently. I'm just talking as a future problem. This is actually a really interesting one. Now, Angelina entered 2 games to Ludum Dare 28. This one, I told everyone about. This was called To That Sect. And when you submit a game to Ludum Dare, you put in a description. There were 2 parts to the description. The first part was written by me. I said, hello, my name's blah, blah, blah. Angelina is my research project. Please review this game as if it was made by a human, or as if you would review any other game. And then underneath, there was a commentary written by Angelina that justified some of its actions. This is a big theme in the field, I think, generally, but particularly in our group at Goldsmiths. Then, without telling anyone, apart from one journalist who very patiently put up with me for 3 months, I submitted a game called Stretch Bouquet Point, which didn't mention Angelina at all. And I edited the commentary it made by Angelina so that it sounded less like it had been made out of templates by a robot. And it still sounded kind of weird, but just to gloss over the fact that this was made by a machine. This was not intended to be a Turing test. The hypothesis was a little bit different, and I'll talk to you about it in a minute. This is a little video of the game that we told people about, To That Sect. Again, lots of dark blobs, which you can't tell the difference of. But actually, you're walking around collecting these boats, and you're avoiding these kind of scary wizard things. And we can talk about why, if you're interested in the question time, why it interpreted the theme this way. But here's some excerpts from the commentary. This is a game about a disgruntled child, thank you, Metaphor Magnet, a founder. Along the way, you must avoid the tombs, that's what it called, these wizard things, as they kill you and collect the ships. Using Google and a tool called Metaphor Magnet, I found that people feel charmed by founders. I think this might come from cults, the founders of cults charming people to join them. So I chose an unnerving piece of music from Kevin MacLeod's Incompetech website. I think that's my favourite bit of the decision-making process. And the music is great. So my hypothesis was that although we see lots of evidence of negative bias in computational creativity, my hypothesis was and always has been that there is actually a positive bias among video games, both developers and players, partly because of this high level of technical literacy, high level of experience with procedural content generation, as we saw. And also, lots of these games are about AIs and interacting with AIs, and it's very sci-fi, and people like this kind of idea. They're very friendly about it. So my hypothesis was that this game would do better than this game. And unfortunately, this is all the evidence I have. These are the rankings for Angelina's games. I was unable to get the vote data. The people that run Ludum Dare literally said they couldn't be bothered to give it to me. They wasn't protecting any data or anything. They just it's a volunteer-run service. I completely sympathise. But it's ordered very strangely. You'll have to take my word for it. This game outperformed this game in every category apart from humour. And obviously, without the hard vote data and without successive runs, I can't prove this conclusively, but I think this is strong evidence that people are positively biased towards Angelina. And to back this up, I've got some quotes, some direct quotes. This guy at the top says, "I have no experience with creating a program to create games, but this certainly gets a lot of points for innovation." So this guy's reviewing Angelina. He's not reviewing the game it made, he's reviewing the software. And this person underneath is interesting. This guy's an evidence of negative bias, but I think he's drowned out by the other comments. This guy says, if it had added shooting at the statues that you must avoid and a goal for how many ships you have to collect, it would have been a better game. He says the AI got the mood right. Angelina scored very highly for mood, but not the gameplay. This dark blob is another screenshot of a game made by a human. It's called Lith. It was entered into Ludum Dare at the same time, and you walk around a maze, avoiding these Dalek-like objects and collecting gold bags. You can't shoot the statues. There is no limit to the number of gold bags you have to collect. It is, in a sense, exactly the same game as the one Angelina entered. But no one makes any comments like this in the description. So it's a really interesting evidence for people judging this entry as fundamentally different. In the time that between the first Ludum Dare entry and this conference, we've had results from the next Ludum Dare, which Angelina entered with a game called Jet Force Gemini. And it fell in every single category. Again, you have to take my word for it. These ratings are different because different numbers of people entered, but proportionally it fell in every single category. And this is exactly what we expected. Because the shine's coming off the apple. People are less interested in Angelina's innovative as a piece of software, and they're actually realizing, hang on a second, these games are not actually very good, and I don't really care what university you're from or how funny the name is, these games are rubbish. And this is exactly what we want, because we're getting honesty, and we want to remove bias, whether it's negative or positive. And these are some very quick comments from the latest one. The best things about it, the music, the sound effects, and the models, are still chosen by you, I guess, meaning me. Even though Angelina justifies this in the commentary, even though it says, this is why I chose this piece of music, and it gives quite a good explanation. He either didn't read it or he didn't believe it, and those are both interesting things. And I like this quote. "I begin to consider Angelina as a game dev friend." Now, I don't believe this guy, but what's interesting is that he played both of Angelina's games, Ludum Dare 28 and 4 months later Ludum Dare 29. And this shows that we're beginning to have a presence in the community. This guy remembered us from the previous Ludum Dare. This kind of made me feel good about getting Angelina to attend these game jams regularly. I'm going to skip this slide, but the key part is the downward slide is going to continue. The shine is continuing to come off the apple, but people are generally enthusiastic. I want to talk very briefly 2 future work slides. Future work for me, that was supposed to say. I read these at 2 a.m. last night, I apologize. Community is two-way engagement. These people are leaving comments on Angelina's games page. It's reviewed by people who entered games themselves. So the reviewers are game developers. It is a peer review process. Angelina can't read them and it can't respond to them. And I think that's an interesting thing to look at, because developers use feedback from people, from developers, from other players, things like that. And I think once we begin to get Angelina taking feedback like this, Angelina will stop being a one-pass system. And by that, what I mean is when you press go, Angelina won't go until it finishes a game. It will go until it hits a problem that it can't solve or that it's not happy with. It will stop, go and ask people to play the game, and then later, many days later, it will continue again. And I actually think lots of computational creativity systems will probably begin to move in this direction, because you can't just produce everything in one go. It's not how humans work. This is actually future work for us, because Angelina needs more stuff. It needs more appreciative power, more generative power, more funnels and pipes plugging into it and coming out of it. I'm so sorry. Metaphor magnet helping is just the beginning. We've got hopefully collaborations with the Painting Fool and Darcy maybe potentially looming. We've seen Darcy or some related work with Darcy already today. And it was 2 AM. I'm sure there's a joke about preserves and jams, but really I was spent at that point. Before I close, 2 things. If you want to find out more about games and about the kind of unusual games that you might have seen in Antonius's talk, games like Proteus, games off the beaten track, I recommend these websites. Warpdoor.com is still active. Forest Ambassador is an excellent website. And Free Indie Games has actually stopped, but it's a great catalogue. You can flick back through it and find cool stuff. And the second thing I want to point out is that in October, I'm going to be co-organising a workshop at a Games Week conference called Experimental AI for Games, and we are interested in unusual and new ideas of how AI and computational creativity can be applied to games. They're short papers, it's an informal workshop, we're going to have a lot of fun, and if you're interested in more, I couldn't edit these slides because Keynote hates me, but exag.org, and this is open to game developers, academics, people watching on Twitter, it's open to everyone. And that's all I've got. And that's all this microphone's got. I really apologise. I'm terribly sorry. But thank you very much.
Why don't you take one?
I'm scared to touch it. Hello. Are there any questions?
Do you have any thoughts about why it's scored lower for humour in the first jam?
So Simon and Jeremy were some of the first computational creativity researchers to play the game, and I have a screenshot on my laptop of them cackling in laughter at playing Stretch Bouquet Point. And that's because it's a game about a wedding. There's bridesmaids floating about everywhere. And in the background there is this extremely shrill, it's actually an African griot chanting about a marriage ceremony. But it just is completely incongruous. Like none of the game makes sense. The description is really weird, and because people didn't know it was Angelina, lots of children enter Ludum Dare. It's like their first kind of game design experience, and people found it surreal and funny, and I think that's why they rated the humour higher. Whereas Angelina's public game was kind of a more serious affair. There were ship's bells tolling in the background and these dark music playing. So yeah, humour's a funny category in Ludum Dare generally. No.
Just thought I'd give you the opportunity to talk about other future work which you might be doing, which is start with an idea generated and turn that into a game.
Right, so we've got a wonderful project which you're going to hear more about on Thursday morning called the What If Machine, the WIM project, which is about idea generation. And ideas feed into everywhere, but no more so, particularly in games. So yes, the idea of starting with an idea. There are lots of really interesting problems in conveying meaning through a video game. And this is partly because they are interactive. They are interactive artifacts. And I wrote a paper at a workshop that me and Antonius organised last year, and it was specifically about how on earth do you get a program to put meaning into a game. And I didn't have any answers then, and I don't now. But maybe with WIM and a few years of research, we'll start to find some. It's a very exciting area, that, because to me, games are. So there's a great definition of a game by Anna Anthropy, who's a game designer and critic. She says, games are experiences created by rules. What you experience in a game is a function of the rules the game has. That's how they express it. And yeah, that's really interesting.
So this is a question about the doesn't make sense business that you said. The game doesn't make sense. And it occurs to me, and I don't know very much about this sort of thing, but for example, when we generate music, everybody's pretty good at generating little bits of music that are pretty interesting, but to generate a piece that's cohesive across 3 minutes, people aren't good at that. I mean, computers aren't good at that. People aren't good at figuring out how to make computers do that. And I wonder if it's the same sort of a question about the games. Like, you can do all these cool little pieces, but together there's not this global coherence yet. Is that true? How do you fix that? Am I thinking at it completely wrong?
So I want to talk to everyone right now and say that this talk was far, far less important than the talk that preceded it. And the reason why is because all of you in this room could contribute to a video game right now. Like, it doesn't matter, even if you work in mathematical discovery or cognitive models. And so you can have a game like Tetris, which has no narrative whatsoever, and you can play that for 20 hours. Because there, the gameplay is what takes the lead, and that can be a very long game. Or you can have a game like Final Fantasy X, which tells 60 hours worth of narrative, and then we need narrative generation to take the lead. And that's how the game becomes longer and more cohesive and more interesting. Or you can have a game like Proteus, where music doesn't exactly take the lead, but it maybe takes on a more important role, and there the player's relationship to the music is is one of the things that influences their engagement with the game. And so, like, one of the things I don't want people to do is sit here and think, well, you know, I work in art, for instance, non-photorealistic rendering. I'm not here to just be window dressing for you guys, but games can take many different forms, and the length of a game can be dependent on many different factors. So it's a massive problem, but it's all of your problems as well. Don't try and dump it on me. I'm just going to push back right now on that. So we can approach it from many different directions, and that's why it's so exciting.
Well, I'd like to return the favor and say that it's important that you show us how to do it, because I'm just hand-waving and you're actually showing tangible results. Early results, but tangible. I just have a question as well. I guess you're using Twitter bots to get properties of visuals, right? Can you use other Twitter bots to inform your decisions instead of those lousy lying humans?
So, as in ask Twitter bots for help? Or yeah. I think in general, at the end of Tony's towards the end of Tony's tutorial yesterday, he talked about the web as this very dangerous but very promising source of information. And a lot of us in this room are programmers, and what programmers like is they like looking at a chaotic problem and finding what the pattern is that unlocks it and makes it simple. And it's exactly the same with mining stuff off Twitter, but those patterns are harder to find. But when you find them, it's glorious. And I've short-circuited it by just having Angelina ask. But at the same time, I know mimicry of humans is not what we're here for, but sometimes it is, again, it comes back to this point of a community. I ask people for help on Twitter, and I think it's interesting for Angelina to, not because it helps Angelina be more creative, but because it affects the perception. Because if you can see that you are influencing Angelina's development, and people in this room have influenced my development as a game developer. So yes, I do want reliance, but I also want unreliable stuff as well. Yeah.
I just wanted to know if anyone guessed your second game was written by Angelina.
So two things happened. First of all, I said that only one journalist knew it. That's actually a lie. There's a guy called Will Heaven who works for The New Scientist, and he managed to find out due to a horrible bug in Ludus' search system. He found out, and he also saw himself silent. And then stories broke just before the results came out. Stories were breaking about Angelina, and a comment appeared at the bottom of Stretch Bouquet Point one day before results closed, and it said, "Ha, you're a control, aren't you?" ? And that one guy or woman, I don't know who he or she was, but that was like a kind of chill went down my spine actually when I saw that. But it was close enough to the end of the review period that I felt like it wouldn't have impacted anyone. It was out of context anyway. But yeah, a few people twigged.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're out of time.